And we're live. This is Mahad Ali from Cairo, Egypt, and we're virtually connecting with the Digital Pedagogy Lab at UNW. I'm going to ask the folks on site to introduce themselves. Miriam, can you start?
Hi, my name is Miriam Neptune. I am the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Smith College.
My name is Chris Gilliard. I'm a professor at Macomb Community College.
And I'm Annemarie Perez, and I'm coordinator of the Humanities program at Cal State University Dominguez Hills as of, well, actually starting on the 17th of August. So not quite yet.
Oh, well, congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we have, for this hangout, we have one other person who's actually a guest on this session because we want to hear from her a lot as well, and it's Sherri. So I'm going to let her introduce herself first, and then Paolo. So Sherri, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sherri Spelic, and I am in Vienna, Austria, and I've been here for a remarkable nearly 30 years, and I teach elementary physical education at an American international school, and I am really pleased to be a part of this forum, so thanks for having me.
Paolo, can you go next?
So, I think it's me. Well, hello, I'm Paulo
Yes.
Pachá. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, and I'm a lecturer in medieval history here. And it's my first time on Virtually Connect.
Naomi, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, hi, I'm Naomi. I'm from Griffith University in Australia, and I study digital cultures, basically. So it's nice to be here.
Hi, I'm Mia Zamora. I'm at Kane University, which is in New Jersey. I am an associate professor of English here, and I direct our writing studies program.
Hi, I'm Kate Bowles. I'm at the University of Wollongong, which is about 90 minutes south of Sydney in Australia. I'm a cinema historian, and I've been coordinating the previous session with Maha.
Hi, I'm Jamila Siddiqui at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm a PhD candidate in the Curriculum and Instruction Department, and I'm excited to meet you all.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us for this session. And so we just had a session about inclusive globally networked learning where Kate, Paul, and I talked about our perspective as internationals. But we also know that this conversation needs to take place within the United States because there's a lot of inequality and power dynamics going on there, and we thought that you guys would be able to talk about that much better than we would. So I think it's a good assumption. I don't know. So, but you can start talking about that if you like, or if you just want to give us feedback on how Digital Pedagogy Lab has been for you so far, if that's something you'd rather talk about, whichever is more comfortable for you. We're just
I think we're all on
happy to have
different
you.
tracks, aren't we? Yeah, well, Chris and I are in the same track,
Oh,
which is
okay.
the action track. Which track are you on?
I'm in the intro track, and it was very exciting to be able to sign up for the intro track because I felt like I jumped into working in digital education into the deep end, and so it was really nice to kind of backtrack to why, not just what we can do and what we can use, but why we're using it and what the implications of the technology are. So that's sort of been where my head's been at this week.
Yeah, I'm in the action track, and I would say that there's a little bit of a division between the work I've done as an activist who works on certain issues relating to the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and the work that I get to do as a librarian. And this was an interesting moment for me where I could kind of think about how those things relate to each other. And particularly in this last conversation, I feel like the issues of equity, when you're talking about having global conversations, are really important to the activism that I do. But at the same time, they're not really addressed very well in my day-to-day work as a librarian on a campus. And so I'm thinking about how I might need to make that shift, taking some of what I understand and challenging myself to do a little bit more work in the face-to-face interactions I have with students. We don't do online education, but we do deal with students from around the world with a number of different conditions that they're bringing to their learning. So
I'm in the action track as well, and I've got to say, first off, right, it's been a real thrill for me to meet Audrey Waters, but also meet new people. Like, people are new to me anyway.
Oh, did somebody touch something here, maybe?
No.
We haven't.
Very
haven't
strange.
touched the table.
Okay, we're good now.
Oh,
We're good now.
where did we go out?
I just heard that you were honored to spend time with Audrey and meet new people, and then after
Yeah,
that,
I am. Very much so. But I think the important thing in the action track for me has been the ability to kind of foreground the idea of what it means to be an activist as an instructor, and to incorporate things we don't talk about a lot, like justice and equity and love and fairness in teaching. So that's been super important and enlightening.
Okay, and so go ahead, Sherri.
It's funny just because, of course, I'm not on site, but I feel almost as if I have been for more of this event than most things. So I think I've been on, maybe this is my third or fourth hangout this week, so I feel like I've almost got the hang of it. And it has been great to follow on Twitter and just share and develop dialogues again with new people that I didn't know before, and I find that I'm sort of in a responsive mode, and I'm also coping with that time thing, because I'm 6 hours ahead of DigiPed right now. So it's an interesting dynamic, because I feel like I am American, but I'm living over here, but my involvement here is lending a lot of insights.
I would like to hear more about the questions that you have in relation to what's talked about in the conference. What is your experience?
So would anybody like to jump in here? Yeah.
No, I was interested in Sherri's experience and what questions she was trying to answer. I kind of approach it that way, like I'm here to try to answer some questions.
Well, actually, my big question is, what is an institution? That came out of after Tressy's talk, and then I just had to work with it. So I wrote about that in a much longer blog post than I intended. But exactly those kinds of questions are the things that have come out for me, and I suppose the next thing will be looking at Kathy Davidson's things about participation. We say everyone should participate, but who does? So those are, for me, are really critical questions that I am, totally into. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. My intro track, we've focused a lot on issues of pedagogy, and how in some cases in many cases there's a tension between what academic institutions, what universities and colleges are asking for from their instructors, and what we believe to be good teaching method. But I also found Tressy's talk, so there was a moment when she put her Underground Railroad up. And because I work with the Chicano movement as my research area, and I realized she's right that the only things that have endured from the movement from the 1960s and 70s are things that became institutionalized: Chicano studies departments, Chicano archives, you know, art projects, artists. There are a few like self-help graphics that in East Los Angeles that are not part of a university that nonetheless have a lineage going back, but they barely are alive a lot of the time, and that there is something about being institutionalized that can be a positive thing, and I thought that was very powerful.
So I guess then a really important follow-up question to that idea is, how can we work towards institutional change that matters in the real world?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions about this, right? Because you know, we are sometimes, depending on our position in the institution, feel very powerful or powerless, right? How do we constitute and understand power? You know, I've been lucky enough for a short period of time anyway to feel relatively powerful, and just in terms of being able to say what I want to say. I mean, whether or not people listen is another matter. But Miriam and I got into that discussion, right? Because, you know, what is the power of a shout versus a whisper, and a shove versus a nudge, you know, and who gets to do that? So those have been, I think, really kind of informative for me just to think about. You know, obviously I don't have any answers, but I think, again, that's been a powerful, again, that there comes that word, but it's been a very fruitful discussion to have, right? Like, how do we, you know, is incremental change enough, right? Because that's the narrative that comes about institutions, right? Is they're slow to change and academics don't want to change, you know. But in a discussion we had with another track, Sean brought up an interesting point, right? That it's not like here's the institution one day and bam, it's automatically a justice, a fair institution the next day, right? That's not really how it happens, even though we would want it to often. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm unresolved about what pace is okay, where, you know, when does it feel like progress is actually happening. But one thing I have more conviction about now is that I would like to retain a sense of history about things, how things have changed always in my practice. So when introducing something that seems like a contemporary or new idea, what is the lineage of that idea? Who got us here? What fights, what struggles brought us here? What conflicts are we still grappling with? Because otherwise I think we lose track of how that change happens, and then we also allow it to be easily kind of silenced or co-opted. So I think for the benefit of students, especially, giving them a sense of where we all are in a historical moment, you know, either on a campus or in a larger institution, is important.
I'm curious, do any of you have any examples from your institutions where they actually have taken on some good steps towards change? And if so, what are those, and what are some things that led to that happening?
Well, in some ways, the existence of my institution comes out of that. Cal State Dominguez Hills was born out of the Watts riots. It originally was going to be Cal State University Palos Verde, which is a very wealthy suburb of Los Angeles. And after the riots, and community activism, it was moved to Carson, which is an area slightly to the south and west of Watts in south central Los Angeles. So the institute, and it's a majority minority institution now. It's also very underfunded, and there are, you know, the faculty are still predominantly white, but its existence is really testimony to, you know, the power of people to change, you know, because that was a big change, you know, when a university has already been sited one place, to change and build it somewhere else is in a state like California, which has just layers of bureaucracy, as does the California State University system itself. So that would be my hopeful story, although it's 50 years old.
Something that happened this year, some of you might be aware that there were a lot of student protests around the United States, initiated by students of color who were demanding recognition and to have their experiences understood and acknowledged by the colleges, specifically in predominantly white colleges and universities. And so there was a solidarity action that took place at my campus, and I was a new librarian there. One of the students in a class that we were in invited the instructor to give her class at one of the occupying rallies, you know, where the students were occupying a building. So we moved the class to that building, and I didn't have to come, you know, but I decided to come as the librarian to that class and bring like a timeline of the history that I'd been able to find in the archives, where students had presented similar demands to these students. So similar events of students occupying buildings on campus, you know, which happened in '69 and in '85 and in, you know, '89, and, you know, and what were the demands that had been asked for at different points. And it was remarkably similar. You know, there were at least 2 or 3 that were basically verbatim from 1969. And so, you know, and it turned out that the instructor I was working with had also been a student at the college, so she was able to talk about her own activism as a student. And so just by going into the archives, the college archives, we were able to surface a history that some students did not have access to previously. And what's been nice about that is, even though that wasn't necessarily, I want to say, supported as an activity for me to do on my job, eventually, you know, the conversations about what ensued really did lead to some institutional response. So now the archivist and I have been asked to present something about the experiences of students of color historically on campus during orientation, which I think is a huge moment for us, a great opportunity for us.
I realize now you're waiting for me to talk about a success. For those who don't know me, that's probably the wrong question to ask me. I'll just say I'm still fighting, right? I mean, the success is that I get to go around and rail against the things that I think are not just, but I'm still waiting for positive results to report. So not just yet, Jamila, but
well,
hopefully
and I
soon.
think that's fabulous, because I think that's actually getting towards one of the points that's been rolling around in my head lately. I was actually just talking about this with a colleague last night, in that it's fabulous that some of these universities, mine included at Wisconsin-Madison, that are starting to take some initiatives in response to these students, but are they really doing the research and really critically thinking about what are these initiatives that they're doing, how impactful they are, or are they just Band-Aids? You know, for example, at my university, they're just slapping on a cultural competence or multicultural competence module that's an online tutorial that faculty now have to take, right? And so, yeah, really thinking about, are we, first of all, yes, awareness, and then secondly, yes, taking the initiative to do these things, but then what's really going to work, and can we stop and have those conversations about what's effective, and how we can include, you know, multiple different facets of difference, and including what we're talking about right now, which is difference in pedagogy, and how digital tools can help us or hurt us, and how we can be critical of that. But anyway, that's my rant.
I wonder if I could just jump in here. and I'm thinking Naomi is there in Australia. There's two of us who are here who are outside the United States. For us, a question is often, when we watch your conversations, the conversations that you have of this nature, we're really intensely aware of the local nature of what you were talking about. When Annemarie, when you said what's rights, I mean, we know what the what's rights are. It's vanishingly unlikely that you would know of the same things here, because that's the way the world works. But we also wonder, I think, sometimes, and I'd be interested to know what Naomi thinks, how do we contribute as activists, as pedagogy activists, as critical educators, when the networks that we work in are flickeringly local and international? Sometimes we're in your conversation, sometimes we're not. And the reason I bring this up is that last week I was briefly involved in a skirmish on Twitter when there was a call for papers, a really beautiful call for papers for people to contribute stories about women of colour in education. The fact that this was US education was not specified, but it was absolutely assumed. And I saw an Australian say, do you mean us? You know, can we contribute to this? To which the answer was kind of, well, only if you're going to help us understand women of colour in US education. But the US education had never been said. Mm-hmm. And this sent me rattling back to Roland Barthes and the thing about ex-nomination. The powerful culture doesn't have to say its own name, and in fact often wishes not to. How do you, as activists inside the US, imagine a contribution from outside?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, right? I'll be painfully honest, even though this is being recorded. Like, someone's got to say that every virtually connecting session. Kate, you've really helped me expand that line of thinking just in this last couple months, because it's not something I've not done a good job of paying attention to it, right? I think one of the things you know, you've said, like, helped me understand, right, is even kind of the I don't want to use this word, but a better one's not coming to me, but the universal nature of kind of how Black Lives Matter has crossed over into so many different cultures, right? Because the issues are very similar. The events are different, but the issues are similar. Whether it's the UK, Australia, I mean, and so what I'm going to try to do, right, is just think about how those things resonate throughout, right? That that for me, or for the things one of the things I concentrate on, right, is blackness. Like blackness, access, geography, right? And just in the lab this week, someone read an article I wrote about redlining and said, oh, we have something very similar in Germany. And I had never thought of that, right? So I mean, I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but what I'm going to try to do a better job of is realize how those things aren't just U.S. things, right? But I think we need to have more connections with people who are not us, right? Even those of us who consider ourselves inclusive, we need to have more connections with people who are not us, because there's no way we would know.
Right. Because you're not going to know just on your own by theorizing it, right? You need to actually have that lived experience with the other person. And I think what maybe I'm not like giving a simple solution or anything, but just saying that it's noticing the differences and the similarities and putting those together to understand the different context. So yes, there are Occupy movements in, I think, South Africa. They're in Egypt. I don't know where else in the world they're happening. I did not actually know about all the ones in the States, but and those are happening, but they're happening for slightly different reasons, and the way the government responds is also very different. And the risks that students are taking by doing it in each country are very different. And so, I mean, one of the conversations that we have about digital citizenship and the vulnerability and that kind of thing, and, you know, openness and trying to get our students to do that, is that when you think about one of the things in the last session, people were talking about their impressions of Egypt. They talked about political bloggers, and then how risky it is to be a political blogger, and how risky it is to just retweet someone for saying something against the government and what that could mean as a consequence to you, because I don't want to talk about it too much, but you know, it's not a simple somebody might harass me online. It's a lot more than that. And it's real, and it happens to people every day, and they get confused. And even like being a Muslim in America, if you joke about something, you can be taken, you know, can become on the FBI blacklist or whatever, you know. So there's things like that.
Yeah, and going back to Kate's question, I mean, something that I was struck by, and really only, I'd say I probably only have a more global view because my my partner is, I was going to say European. He's from the UK, so he's European for now. But the similarity between what's going on in Greece and Turkey and what's going on in Australia and what's going on in the U.S. in terms of the detention of families, of people whose only crime is trying to escape, you know, persecution. And we have, you know, one of the things going on right now in the U.S. At the same time it's going on in Australia is we're having protests right now about women with children who've been detained in essentially prisons for almost a year, waiting because they're seeking asylum in the U.S. And these are for-profit prisons. You know, so, you know, what's going on behind those walls is really horrendous, and this is going on all over the world right now. The wealthy countries are basically, you know, treating refugees as criminals.
Right. There's something called a for-profit prison. What's that?
Oh,
I don't
gosh,
know what that is.
yeah.
Most of our prisons many of our prisons in the United States are for-profit. They're run by private companies that the state pays. And then in a lot of them, the prisoners are then forced to work for cents an hour, performing labor. So, yes.
And you can imagine, if it's a small town, how that contributes to the economy. So the circular, you know, the cycle of needing more prisoners to spur your economy.
And many of those detained in those prisons many of the people detained in those prisons are immigrants who, or you know, people who have no rights under the U.S. Constitution. So they also don't have rights to legal representation. They can be held indefinitely in many cases. So their labor is exploited in a way that they cannot contest. Yeah.
And one other layer, many people and institutions are invested in these, like you know, colleges and universities. So there's been a movement to get them to divest, but yeah, it's a.
And a lot of the food service providers at colleges are also food service providers to prisons. So, so by through our contract dollars at a lot of the institutions where we work, we're passively supporting these companies. Yeah. I think when you force us to articulate some of the things that we take for granted here, I think it's really important. That exercise is really important, because I think, as you said, you know, when I introduced myself, I told you the name of my college as if you would know. I didn't locate it anywhere. It's a critique that I have of white Americans often who don't name their race or their position in society. They don't think about privilege or even the specificity of their experience, but I have to talk about mine. But I reproduced it, right, in this conversation. So I feel like when asked, I really love having known you for very long, Maha, how you pointedly ask us to be accountable for those things. I think that's one of the things that I would like to be asked to do more often. Not to put that labor in your spot, but more to say, invite me when in conversation to be accountable. Because it
And
educates.
it's about learning with each other, I think, learning with each other rather than educating the other or putting the other in the position. And to be honest, a lot of the times when I talk about a post-colonial position or I talk about women of color, I have to recognize that in my country, I am the dominant majority, right? I'm Muslim, I am pale-skinned relatively to my culture, so I'm not black in my country. There are people who are considered darker than me who have all kinds of discrimination against them. I'm the majority religion. Wearing a headscarf sometimes works for you, sometimes doesn't, depends on who's in government and what the mood is. But, you know, so there's that too. So I'm not specifically oppressed other than being a woman in this culture, so. And working at an American university where the Americans, of course, have a lot more privileges and all kinds of things. But if I just went and lived as an Egyptian and spoke Arabic all the time, I'd probably be okay. So.
I just want, Miriam, I really appreciated this awareness that you just brought into the conversation, because that is something that I so often feel is missing. Right? It's the self-awareness of recognizing, wait a minute, did I just interrupt this person? Did I, how am I exercising my power? And to what degree am I recognizing privilege that I'm living in? And for me, that's something that I feel like I'm constantly revisiting. Is, what kind of privilege do I have, and therefore, with that privilege, what doors can I open for other people? So if I'm in this privilege, how do I bring people on board? And I have to acknowledge Maha, because Maha has been a great sponsor of me and my work, and she is someone who has consistently brought me on board with writing, with this event, with so many things. And that for me is what's different, that makes a huge difference. And so that self-awareness piece is just so critical for me. And Kate, it reminds me of what you said, because for instance the article that you shared this morning about the refugees, I read it because you sent it and said, please read this. Mm-hmm. And then that was a chance for me to familiarize myself with the situation I had no idea about. And granted, that for me it's only scratching the surface, but it's the beginning. And for me, that's so important, to just begin.
I mean, and one of the other things that's come up, with Kate and me, right, is that we so often rely on platforms to tell us what to do and where to look. Like Twitter asks you where you're located, right? And so it bases a lot of what you get or who they suggest on that. And so if you say, Detroit, where I'm from, then it gives me Detroit. And I think that. Again, one of the things I've come to really value is having friends. And I mean, it shouldn't be their job, but having friends from other places now who make me understand this in a way that I haven't before, right? That I just sort of took for granted.
I think if I could just hop in here, because I want to acknowledge publicly that Chris has done a great deal for me as a friend from another place. And I think for those of us outside the US, we're really conscious that the US is foreign, international, it is the other. And there have been a couple of times specifically that I've needed to reach out and ask a question of someone. Chris has responded with all of the patience on the planet, and has specifically supported one of my daughters in thinking through some complicated matters. He didn't have to do this. He's reached out and backed up a small-town Australian teenager in her thinking about complex issues. We are each other's friends from other places. We make each other's worlds bigger when we do this. And we have to diligently think through this question of centre and periphery, and instead say, the centre is where I am. Let me not centre it on myself, wherever that is, but let me try to imagine your centre, which is where you are, while acknowledging the reality of geopolitical power, which means that most of the messages are going one way. And so this is really just me saying thank you to Chris publicly.
Oh.
There's some people who haven't spoken. I'm so curious. What's happening in Rio? Paolo's in Rio? What is it like to have the United States and who knows however many other countries descend on your town? Are you able to go about your day without difficulty?
Yeah, I'm not hearing very well, but let me try to answer. I think the Olympics are very isolated within the city, so daily life mostly continues as it were a few months ago. There are some parts of the city that are more full. But one question that would be interesting to go over here is that we now have for the Olympics.
Oh, sorry, Paolo, do you mind speaking a little bit slower? You got stuck somewhere.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
We didn't hear the question that you posed.
Sorry?
We did not hear your question.
Oh, what I said is that one thing that it's interesting to think about Rio right now and regarding this conversation is that we now have a new subway line, and that subway line is now accessible only for people with tickets for the Olympics. So we have some city structure that people from the city can access right now. So sometimes this kind of difference manifests themselves within the periphery.
I remember when the Olympics were in Los Angeles in 1984. I was a teenager, and everything that went in for the Olympics went in the best parts of the city, and including all of what became all of this housing at two of the big universities, UCLA and USC. And in fact, when the pool was built at USC, it was built with the understanding that it would be open to the neighborhood. And the neighborhood that USC is in is poor and predominantly African American, or at least it was at the time. And after the fact, USC basically cut off access. And so yeah.
I think that's, another thing that I may have a hard time articulating this, but I'm a parent, and I think about these things, the difficulty of the contradiction, right? I have a son who plays sports, and it was really exciting for him to see athletes from around the world in a venue, and in the U.S., it's pure propaganda. I mean, the commercialization of the Olympics is just it's ubiquitous, and you really can't. All of the messaging is very. It's just very. I don't know the word. Dogmatic. It was
hyper-nationalist.
Hyper-nationalist, and luckily for him, he doesn't have exposure to a lot of television, so he says, "This is a big commercial, Mommy. This is a big advertisement." And so we were talking about the narrative of people who are displaced. There was a team that is just of displaced people, and we had to stop and talk about the fact that the Olympics itself created many displaced people and displaced communities, and that we in the U.S., we know historically other examples of that he has heard about, from Katrina to the Atlanta Olympics that displaced people, and we have a relationship to what's happening in Haiti and the people displaced by the earthquake, and the rebuilding usually pushing the most vulnerable people out of the center of a community. So anyway, we were just sort of talking about that, but having to present it that way also means killing the glitz and the glamour that, what worries me sometimes is having to basically having my son develop a more cynical point of view in order to know the truth.
I have a similar story from Australia when we had the Sydney Olympics in 2000. I come from a small rural town in Queensland, which is in north of Australia. And when the Sydney Olympics was, there's an inner city suburb of Sydney called Redfern, and a lot of the Indigenous people used to live there. And during but it was on the line to the Olympic venue, and they picked up all those people that lived in Redfern and moved them to my country town in North Queensland. So dispossessed them of their homes and moved them to my country town. Now the problem was that town in particular, rural Australia is very suspicious of difference. And we also had a large number of Sudanese refugees being resettled in our country town at that time as well. And basically when I was teaching in a high school there, we had Nazis threatening the school to come in and take out the Indigenous and the Sudanese students because of the racial tensions that were caused by dispossessing a whole pile of Indigenous students and dropping a whole pile of refugees into that town. That it completely changed. Like, it was violent. We had to take Indigenous students away for a day because there was a very real threat that the Nazi groups that had been created in that town, since the people of different types of people had come to the town, and it was no longer basically a white rural town. We took the Indigenous kids to Dreamworld because they were threatened with the Nazis coming in on campus and killing them all one day. And so we had to do that. So yeah, what you're talking about, this is all started with the Olympics, basically, this violence in my town.
That's a horrendous story. This has been such a story, so many horrendous stories. And I was just thinking about that. First, the government is the reason that this happened, right, in the first place? And not only that, you don't know? But I mean, it's the reason that these people got displaced, right? I mean, they probably didn't just, they either kicked them out or they had to move, right? But then not only did they create the problem, but they didn't also culturally, sensitively deal with how that was going to affect the ecosystem for everybody. And it also reminded me of something. There was a German professor here a couple of months ago talking about how they were trying to help Syrian refugees integrate in Germany. And it was very interesting because he was talking about teaching them to speak German with the correct accent, because Germans will be very bad to you if you don't speak with a good German accent. But then the other thing is that it seemed, again, it's about helping the refugees integrate into German culture, but not, I think, working with German people to help them become more welcoming of the refugees. As if it's the refugees who have to fix the local people if they... And to be honest, Egyptians are not welcoming of refugees either, and Syrians are our neighbors. They're Arab, they're Muslim, they're a lot like us. And if they spoke with an Egyptian accent, you wouldn't know that they weren't Egyptian. And they can do that. So it's also like, I mean, sometimes you think that the more different you are from a person because of your color or your culture or so on, these kinds of clashes are more likely to happen. But even with people culturally similar, because of struggles over land and power and economic reasons, but also a lot of bias and discrimination, I think, that has nothing to do with any logical reason, that these things happen. I'd like to give people just a chance to give us some closing remarks. We're closing in on an hour, and I actually am very sleepy.
Yes. Me? I just want to say thank you. It's a privilege to get the chance to talk with all of you. And I look forward to having more venues to do this, and getting on your Twitter streams and hearing what's happening where you are, and having the opportunity to share that information with others as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I mean, I think I've said this before, but this summer has been a real awakening for me in terms of some of these discussions and how to think about them outside of my specific context. So I'll just end to say that I hope that I can continue that as we move through the year.
I just want to thank you for including me, and also to thank everyone in this cast, because it's my country works very hard, I think, in all of its institutions to keep us isolated and from talking with people who are from places that we have horrible influence over, and I think we don't hear it in our own media. We don't we don't travel very much, relatively speaking, and being able to say to someone who's making an argument, no, I have a friend in Egypt and she says, X, that means a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. It's been a painful conversation, but an important one, and I feel so much closer to everybody here for it. If anybody virtually would like to close in, I think at least Sherri, I'd like you to also just say something at the end, because you're also a guest on this session.
Again, thank you all. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to learning more about you and with you in the coming weeks and months. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the broadcast now, and I'll let you know when we're no longer live. Thank you.